I'm telling you about these experiences because some moments still haven't left my mind. A year ago, I came here to be alone. I wanted to spend the final months of the year in this place. It was an old mountain cabin buried deep in the forest. It had been standing there for years, but it was usually rented out for short stays. The nearest town was hours away by car, which is why almost no one used this road during winter. My days followed the same routine. In the mornings, I lit the fireplace, made my coffee, and stayed indoors. The rest of the day passed with small tasks, reading, and simply enjoying the silence. That morning started out like any other, until I noticed the firewood was running low. Only a few pieces were left in the pile beside the fireplace. I grabbed the axe, put on my coat, and stepped outside. Fresh snow had fallen overnight. As I walked a short distance away from the cabin, something caught my eye. Between the trees, half buried in the snow, stood an old pickup truck. Its original color was impossible to tell. Rust and grime covered every surface. My first thought was that it was some abandoned wreck, left there years ago. Then I noticed the tracks in the snow. The tire marks looked fresh. There were footprints near the door. It must have arrived sometime during the night or early that morning. A strange uneasiness settled in. I told myself to stay calm. Hunters passed through this area. Maybe someone had gotten stranded. I tried to come up with logical explanations. I reminded myself why I was there. I raised the axe and brought it down onto a log. Just as I was about to swing for the second time, I heard something. Footsteps. On the snow. Slow, clear, heavy. I lifted my head and looked between the trees, but I saw no one. The footsteps continued for a moment, then suddenly changed direction. Almost as if they'd noticed I had stopped. I stayed still and listened. I told myself it was probably just someone passing through. I gathered the wood quickly, slung the axe over my shoulder, and headed back toward the cabin. That's when I noticed the footprints again. But this time, they weren't leading deeper into the forest. They were coming toward the cabin. I followed them. The snow was disturbed right in front of the door. The footprints stopped there. No sign of turning back. No trail leading away. It was as if someone had stood in front of the door and then vanished. As my hand rested on the doorknob, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't the cold. It was that sudden awareness you get when you feel like you're being watched. I opened the door. Inside, the cabin looked exactly the same. Quiet. Tidy. But now that silence felt wrong. At first, I tried to stay rational. A truck in the woods. Footprints. Strange, yes, but not proof of anything. Still, I decided to check every room. The bedroom was untouched. The bed was made, the window locked. The bathroom was empty. The pantry held nothing but old shelves and tin cans. I even checked the cupboards. No one was there. All the windows and doors were locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing suggested that anyone had been inside the cabin. Darkness came earlier than I expected. Normally, there would be a light breeze by this time. Branches rustling, snow drifting softly through the air. That evening, everything was completely still. I locked the doors and turned off the lights. The cabin sank into darkness. When I lay down on the bed, I tried to stay awake, but my body refused. I fell asleep. At some point during the night, I opened my eyes. I heard a sound coming from inside the cabin. Footsteps. Slow footsteps on the wooden floor. They were coming from the kitchen. I didn't move. I held my breath, pressing my chest down, terrified that even my heartbeat might give me away. The steps weren't rushed. There was no panic, no hesitation. It sounded like someone who knew the cabin well, someone moving comfortably, as if they had memorized the layout. One step, then another. The soft creaking of the floorboards drifted through the cabin. I couldn't tell whether the sound was getting closer or moving away. I only knew one thing. Someone was there. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence became unbearable. My ears rang. Even the wind outside seemed to disappear, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A drawer, opening and closing. Slowly, smoothly, without resistance, without a creak. That's when I realized this wasn't the sound of someone searching. It was the sound of someone who knew exactly where to look. That's when it hit me. This person wasn't wandering around at random. I reached for my phone. The screen barely lit up. The signal was weak, but I managed to call the police. After a while, frantic sounds came from behind the cabin, quick footsteps tearing through the snow. Someone was trying to escape. Then, in the distance, I heard sirens. That sound was the most comforting thing I had ever heard. As the sirens drew closer, the movement outside grew louder. There was no more hiding. I heard slipping footsteps, metal striking something, and then a loud crash behind the cabin. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, there was a firm, controlled knock at the door. "Police, are you inside?" I remember finally taking a full breath. When I opened the door, 2 officers stepped in, weapons drawn. They pulled me aside and searched the cabin, then moved toward the back. They found him right behind the cabin, kneeling in the snow. His coat was thin, his shoes were soaked, and the pattern on the soles of his shoes matched the footprints I had seen that morning exactly. Seeing him there, handcuffed and silent, drained all the fear out of me, leaving only a strange emptiness. One of the officers turned to me. "The doors and windows weren't forced," he said, but he still got inside. They led me into the kitchen. When one of them crouched beneath the cupboards, I saw it. An old ventilation grate, hidden from the outside. It was low to the ground, almost completely buried by snow. The metal plate had loosened years ago. The man had pushed it open and crawled straight into the kitchen. His voice trembled as he explained. His car had broken down on the road during the night. He had entered the cabin, seeing no lights, just to avoid freezing to death. He thought it was empty. When he saw me in the morning, he panicked and hid. What he said made sense. It was logical, but no explanation justified entering someone else's home so easily. As the police took him away, I noticed something. Before getting into the car, he glanced toward the kitchen. It was quick, but deliberate, as if he was checking something one last time. When the cabin fell silent again, that silence no longer felt peaceful. After the officers left, I turned the lights back on. I opened the kitchen drawer. Everything was exactly where it should be. Nothing was missing. I didn't stay there another night. I packed my things before dawn, locked the door, and looked at the forest one last time. The snow lay untouched. But now I know this. Just because a place is far away on the map doesn't mean it's safe. Any place you can't fully control is open to others. And sometimes, the real danger isn't whether the doors are locked, it's going inside too quickly. If it were you, would you have gone inside when you saw those footprints? About 3 years ago, while I was working the night shift, I experienced something I'll never forget. Our town isn't a place people go out of their way to visit. There are only a few houses, an old post office, and the small gas station where I worked. The station sits right where the mountain road narrows after a sharp bend. When winter arrives, the town becomes even more isolated. People either head south or barely leave their homes at all. During night shifts, I often go hours without seeing a single customer. The silence stretches so long that sometimes I have to remind myself the station is still open. The wind rattling the sign outside or the distant rumble of a truck is the only proof that the night isn't completely empty. That night, it had been snowing for hours. The wind blew it sideways, blurring the edge of the road. Inside, the station felt uncomfortably quiet. When the door suddenly opened and the bell rang, I jumped. It was late, almost closing time. I didn't expect anyone to stop in weather like that. The bell sounded louder than usual. The man who entered shook the snow from his coat and shut the door. Cold air rushed in for a moment. Then the station fell silent again. He was middle-aged, wearing a thick, worn coat and old boots soaked through with snow. He didn't take off his hat. His face showed no clear expression, but his eyes were restless. They kept moving, never settling in one place. It felt like he wasn't looking at the store. He was watching me. He began drifting between the shelves. Slowly, without choosing anything, he picked up a bag of chips, set it back down. Opened the cooler, looked inside, closed it again. I'd seen this kind of behavior before. People who couldn't decide, or people killing time. But this felt different. It was as if he wasn't deciding what to buy, but how long he could stay. When he reached the counter, he stopped and looked directly at me. "Night shift must be tough," he said. I shrugged. "You get used to it." He smiled, but it wasn't warm. His lips moved, but his eyes didn't. "There aren't many people around here at night," he said. "Especially in weather like this." I didn't respond. I pretended to adjust the card reader, letting my fingers linger on the buttons longer than necessary. As the silence stretched, the station felt smaller. He kept talking. "Do you live nearby?" "In town," I replied. "Alone?" This time I looked up. "Would you like anything else?" He paused, as if choosing his words. Then he smiled faintly. "Just curious," he said. "It gets very quiet out here at night." He emphasized the word quiet. "When it snows," he added, "there's no sound at all. Even if someone screams." He paused. "No one hears." Something inside me tightened. When you hear words like that, you try to stay rational. You tell yourself not to overreact, but your body reacts first. My shoulders tensed. My stomach knotted. My breathing slowed without me realizing it. He was still watching me, still not saying what he wanted. It felt like he didn't want the conversation to end. "I don't want to talk," I said firmly. "If you're not buying anything, please leave." He stepped back slightly, raising his hands. All right. But he didn't leave right away. He stood by the door for a moment, tilting his head, looking me up and down. Then he opened the door and disappeared into the snow. When the door closed, the station was quiet again. But now the silence felt wrong. I watched through the window. He paused before getting into his car. Then the headlights came on, and he vanished into the storm. The rest of my shift felt endless. By the time I left, the snowfall had intensified. The mountain road was completely white. My headlights barely reached a few meters ahead. After a while, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, far back, keeping a steady distance. I told myself it was nothing, just someone heading the same way. Rare in that weather, but possible. Still, I sped up. The car behind me sped up too. I slowed down, so did they. My heart began to race when I left town and turned onto the narrow road leading to my house, and the headlights followed. I knew it wasn't a coincidence anymore. Once you enter that road, there's no escape. It's a single-lane road. Pine trees press in on the right. A snow-covered slope drops away on the left. Snowplows rarely come this far. In front of me, there was no road, just a tunnel of white. Behind me, the headlights stayed at the same distance, never getting closer, never falling back. It felt intentional. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. My fingers were numb, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or fear. My house sits at the very end of the road, tucked between the trees. A small, single-story place. Forest behind it. No neighbors. The nearest house is at least a 20-minute walk away. When I reached the house, I didn't even turn off the engine. I opened the door and stepped out into knee-deep snow. I didn't look back, but I knew the car behind me had stopped. Its headlights burned into the snow. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. I went inside and locked it. The click of the lock echoed so loudly it felt like the entire mountain had heard it. I parted the curtain. The man had stepped out of his car, pulling his hood over his head. Then he looked up, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. It was him. The man from the gas station. He stood there for a moment, then walked toward the house. When he reached the window, I stopped breathing. "I know you're alone in there," he said. The wind muffled his voice, but his words were unmistakable. "I just want to talk for a bit." My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and called the police. As it rang, he tilted his head, as if he knew exactly what I was doing. I gave my address loudly, the road name, the description of the house, the mountain route. I repeated everything slowly and clearly. When he heard that, he stepped back. He looked around, at the forest, at the road. He began pacing around the house. About 15 minutes later, I heard it. A siren. It was far away, but it echoed between the mountains. The man's posture changed instantly. His shoulders dropped. He muttered something under his breath, stumbled through the snow to his car, slammed the door shut, and sped away without even reversing. I stayed frozen behind the door. I was still standing there when the police arrived. I told them everything: the station, the questions, the drive, what he said at the window. One of the officers shook his head. "We get similar reports in winter," he said. "Following cars, waiting at doors, snow hides everything." They never found the man. After they left, I checked the house again. The doors, the windows, the locks. Nothing had been touched. I didn't sleep that night. The house was silent, but that silence no longer felt safe. Every small sound kept me wide awake. That weekend, I learned what real tranquility meant. When I rented the mountain cabin for 2 days, my only goal was to rest. I wanted to escape work stress, city noise, and the endless stream of notifications. That's why the small cabin I saw on an online listing immediately caught my attention. It was nestled in the foothills of the mountains, surrounded by forest, with the nearest settlement hours away. The description mentioned, "rarely used in winter." Normally, that's the kind of detail that makes you hesitate. But at that moment, it meant only one thing to me: no one would bother me. The weather forecast predicted snow, but I was assured there was nothing to worry about. The roads were said to be clear. I arrived at the cabin in the afternoon. It was small, 1 bedroom, 1 living space. There was electricity, but it was weak, cutting out and coming back intermittently. My phone had no signal, which I had expected, so it didn't concern me. I brought my things inside, lit the fireplace, and made coffee. When I looked out the window, clouds were gathering over the hills. The sky was gray, but it wasn't snowing yet. Everything was quiet, deeply, peacefully quiet. The trees were still. There was no wind. The first day passed without incident. I read, cooked a little, and spent time looking out the window. In the evening, it began to snow, lightly at first, then heavier. The wind picked up. The cabin creaked softly. Just the natural sounds of a wooden house, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Around midnight, as the fire began to fade, I added a few more logs. Outside, the storm had intensified. Tree branches brushed against the windows. Snow clung thickly to the glass. As I turned away, something caught my eye. I stepped closer and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, everything was almost completely white. Snow swirled violently in the wind, and among the trees, there was a moving light, a flashlight. It was a clear yellow beam swaying as if someone were holding it while walking. It moved slowly and steadily between the trees, straight toward the cabin. Then it suddenly stopped. The light stayed still for a few seconds, and then it went out. I waited. In the darkness, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Maybe it was a hiker, I thought. But hiking in the middle of a storm, at midnight, at this altitude, anyone doing that would have to be completely insane. I went back to bed. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Still, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. When morning came, the first thing I did was look outside. The snow was knee-deep. In daylight, everything looked different, clean, white, calm. But right in front of the cabin, there were deep footprints leading straight to the door. They stopped directly in front of it. I hadn't opened the door. No one had come inside. But someone had come here in the middle of the night, during the storm, and stood right there. Why hadn't they knocked? My phone still had no signal. The road was likely closed. I realized I would have to stay another day. The wind was strong enough to make the trees sway. The windows rattled softly in their frames. I knew the road was closed, but since it was daytime, I decided to check around the cabin, try to figure out where the footprints had come from. When I stepped outside, the cold sank straight into my bones. The snow reached my knees. The footprints near the door were still visible, though partly filled in by fresh snow. I walked toward the back of the cabin. The snow was deeper there. My breath rose in thick clouds. Then I saw them. Fresh footprints. They had been made after the previous night. The tracks formed a half circle around the cabin. They hadn't gone to the door. They passed beneath the windows. Someone had quietly circled the house. My heart started racing. I lifted my head and scanned the area. That's when I saw it. A dark silhouette among the trees. It stood completely still. I couldn't tell if it was looking at me or just standing there. It remained motionless for a few seconds, then suddenly moved away. "Hey!" I shouted. My voice came out rough. "Do you need help?" No response, only the wind. I rushed back inside and locked the door. My hands were shaking. I checked every window, but I saw no one. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a shadow. But the footprints were real. As evening approached, the sky darkened. Early darkness was normal here in winter. I added more logs to the fire, turned on the lamps, and tried to calm myself. A few hours passed. I was just starting to relax when I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving through the snow. Not hurried, not running. My heart slammed in my chest. I approached the window and lifted the curtain. The flashlight beam hit the glass directly. The light was bright, focused, intentional. It was searching inside. It lingered for a few seconds, then pulled away and disappeared. I stepped back and closed the curtain. The footsteps started again, this time right at the door. There was no knock. The door wasn't forced, but someone was standing there, motionless, listening. A thin line of light appeared beneath the door. A flashlight was being held low, aimed under the threshold. Steady, patient, waiting for movement, for a sound. Even the soft crackle of the fire felt too loud. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The light went out. The footsteps resumed. Slower now, more controlled. They circled the cabin, pausing at each window, stopping, looking, moving on. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew one thing for certain. Someone was there, and they weren't leaving. I didn't sleep until morning. I kept the fire burning. I checked the door. I watched the windows. I never saw them again that night. When morning came, it was suddenly over. The wind had stopped. Snow still fell, but almost silently. Outside, the snow was knee-deep. Footprints surrounded the cabin, but this time something was different. They were closer. Beneath one of the windows, the snow was undisturbed, as if someone had knelt there, stayed in the same spot for a long time. From that place, footprints led toward the door, but didn't stop there. The tracks in front of the door were scattered, as if someone had hesitated, then changed their mind. Later, I heard an engine. A snowplow was coming up the road. I ran outside and stopped the driver, telling him everything that had happened. He listened quietly. His expression didn't change. Then he looked toward the hillside. "People stay in places like this during winter," he said calmly. "Without permission. They use empty cabins." "But why didn't he knock?" I asked. "Didn't he want help?" The man shrugged. "Some people don't." He didn't explain further. I packed my things and left as quickly as I could. When I glanced back at the cabin in my rearview mirror, I thought I saw a silhouette among the trees. I don't know what it was, but something was there. I can't name it. And not being able to explain it is the worst part.